Great, we're online. Hello, Martin.
Good to see you.
Yeah, wonderful. Just going to have a chat about your life story, your experiences in both church planting and working, and just your thoughts looking back over your life and just recent seasons and maybe looking forward a little bit. But first of all, before we get into that, just briefly, maybe half a minute, just who's Martin? Where are you from? What are you up to? What do you do? What don't you do?
I don't do lots of things. We live on the North Suffolk coast in a really beautiful part of the world. Members of Lowestoft Community Church, married to Claire. We've got 3 children ranging from 16 to 22. Will that do? Oh, and I work for myself. I run a consultancy business around the construction and development of affordable housing, which is going amazingly well, and I've been doing it for about 8 years.
Fantastic. And we're both part of Business Link, which is a community of people who are involved in business, but also interested in church planting and the kingdom, essentially. And recently we were having a chat, just a discussion about, the benefits of having workplace individuals leading churches, being part of planting teams. And I know you've been part of both. And I'd love to just hear your experiences. Maybe if you can just go back about 15 years and just walk us through how you felt called into church planting, how it happened, and then what happened after that.
Well, I'll go back a little bit more than that. I can remember, I guess it's probably nearly 25 years ago. We lived in a village 20 minutes south of Lowestoft, and the guy who was leading the church at the time asked if they could have a prayer meeting in our house about planting in the villages that we lived in and around. And I kind of had no interest in that at all, really. But we were the only people that lived there. So I said, oh, go on, you can have the meeting at our house. Of course you can, that's fine. And we had this string of meetings that lasted about 6 months, probably once a month. And in the last meeting, I can remember God just sort of grabbing hold of me and me absolutely being convinced that we were going to be a part of that. Anyway, there were a few false starts and all the rest of it. But about 18 years ago, we led a church plant into a little market town about half an hour south of Lowestoft, where we subsequently moved to. And there were about 17 of us on that first Sunday morning. I can remember it well. And over the next 10 years, the church grew and declined and grew again. I suppose at our peak, we'd got to maybe 60 adults and a load of kids. But it covered quite a wide geographical area, a couple of market towns, maybe a dozen villages, and quite a dispersed population. And it was great. And we really felt the hand of God on it. We saw people saved. There was a real sense of family. The quality of much of what we did was really good for a church of that size. But I knew I'd been agonizing really for years over what it was that God had called me to specifically. So whilst I was leading that church plant, I came to the conclusion that God primarily was calling me to the marketplace, and that I guess with a lot of guys in particular, I think guys in particular, if they're kind of going for it at work, there's a tendency that they pull back a bit at church. Well, I love Jesus. I love his church. I believe it's the answer to a broken world. So I've always been kind of committed to both. I've been going to elders meetings at Lowestoft without being an elder for 4 or 5 years before we planted the church. I was preaching, I was leading services, I chaired the trustees, I ran the membership course, loads of stuff. So, I was completely committed to that. The plant happened. I was asked if I'd lead it. Yeah, of course I will. But it became very clear over the next few years that I didn't really want to work for the church. And I can remember a pint of beer in a pub in Norwich as I was agonising over all of this with Maurice Nightingale, who's on the apostolic team of Relational Mission, one of the New Frontiers families. And Morris said, if you're going to work for the church and do it kind of as your primary focus, you know in the pit of your stomach, God's gripped you for that and nothing else. And I knew that wasn't the case. Does that kind of help? So I could just carry on, or you could ask me another question. I'll just carry on. So the church is growing, and it was all kind of, going well. But both myself and the other guy who were in leadership basically felt the same. And so we needed leadership resource, and we probably spent the last 5 years of the 10 years that we existed as a church looking for someone. And there's loads of great guys that want to go and lead church plants in big cities, which you go and plant in a London borough and you've got 250,000 people within a 20-minute walk of you. It's very different from planting in rural Suffolk, where within a 20-minute drive we might have had 15,000 people. So it was just impossible for the guys in RM to find someone to parachute in, and there was certainly nobody within the church that could have been raised up to that. So we kind of struggled on, and I think with church planting, particularly in this kind of context, it's all hands to the pump. Everyone is giving a massive amount. We had a great program and it was fruitful, but we needed more hands to the wheel, and it kind of seized up. And I think you're either going forwards or you're going backwards. I don't think you can really stand still. And so very sadly, and it caused us to think, what was all that about? We've moved house, we've moved away from friends, there's been a cost to this, we've worked hard, we had a young family, I got this massive job, and I was leading the church, so I've got these sort of 3 big things going on in my life. And you think, God, what was all of that about? But we then went back to Lowestoft Community Church, and that's been great.
Oh, fantastic.
I suppose, because we've chatted before, Lloyd, so I know you know my story. So at the time, in the marketplace, I was a director of a very big housing association, probably one of the 20 largest in the country at the time. And it was a massive job. And we had a change of chief executive. Do you remember that thing called the credit crunch? We've kind of all forgotten about that. But 2008, all of that was going on at the time that we got a new chief executive. And it became a real struggle at work. I kind of had the same responsibilities. Was being told that my kind of targets were the same. This huge program of building new homes, but it was increasingly like wading through treacle. Keep doing the same things, but you can't, because we're going to put all these barriers in your way. So it just became a really difficult 2 years.
Which with no grass, eh?
Well, just bizarre stuff. In January 2011, we landed back in the UK a couple of days after New Year, having been treated to a wonderful family holiday in Florida by my father-in-law, who'd just retired. And the first day back, all hell broke out at work. I was given this sort of huge, long email, about 6 pages long, of all the things I've been doing wrong, which came completely out of the blue. I was called back to the office and suspended, and auditors were called in, and management consultants were called in. And 9 months later, they'd had about a dozen auditors in for 9 months, and of course they found nothing. But in the April, it became apparent that, if they'd lost confidence in me to that extent, there was really no way back. Whether, I knew there was nothing to find. So there was no fear in that sense. But I suggested a compromise agreement, and they paid me off, and I left, and that was fine. They're now one of my biggest clients, which is fantastic.
Good afternoon.
Just amazing how God restores things. And
so that was all going on at the same time. Both the church thing and the work thing were colliding at the same time.
I would think at that time, I'm kind of guessing now, I'm not very good with maths, unlike yourself. I would think at the time our twins were about 8 or 9 and our youngest was 3 or 4. So there was, all of that. All of the church stuff and me looking for someone else, not being able to find anyone. All the daily life of church, preaching rotas, small groups, pastoral issues, and this massive job that was like stuck in glue, and then it all came to a head. And if I'm honest, I would say I went to see the doctor to get signed off in my head as a tactical move to just not be around for a few weeks. But the truth was, as you said, it brought everything to a head and I'd burnt out. So that was really quite strange. I then went to work for someone else for a couple of years and then subsequently set the business up. So all of that was great. The church continued for another couple of years. I took about 3 months out. That was fine, but it just became apparent that there wasn't the staffing to see it forward, and therefore it kind of drew back in a very good way. We were affirmingly welcomed back to Lowestoft Community Church, led by my friend Ben Parish, Mike Betts, who leads relational mission, is on the eldership team there. We were treated really well. It's interesting, it probably took me 3 years, I would say, to recover. I was going great guns at work, but just to recover, I didn't realise how tired I was from all of that kind of tripartite life I was leading. And so a gradual process of recovering, I would say.
Okay, that's a wonderful summary of all that, and I guess part of that is, diving into callings, and you sensed an initial calling, but since then you've maybe clarified through this really difficult season a primary calling that God's really shown you. This is what you need to be doing. So just tell us a little bit more about callings and how God has really spoken to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I really go with all that kind of spiritual language, really. I just think if you love Jesus and you love the church, you plough yourself into it. And I think if you're gifted as a leader in leadership and you're leading in the marketplace, you're going to be involved in leading at church. And if you're not, well, it's not functioning as it should. So I would say, I've always felt that with the time I had, I wanted to fulfill that leadership gifting in the church. I'd always thought at the back of my mind I was primarily called to the marketplace, but it wasn't until there was that kind of pressure. Not pressure, that's not fair. The guys are lovely, but there was that kind of, look, Martin, we really think you should go part-time or full-time at the church. And I just kind of knew that wasn't right in my heart of hearts. And it culminated in that chat in the pub when I said, no, well, I haven't got that urge in my stomach where I can't do anything other than work for the church. That just isn't there. But that doesn't mean that I won't give my all. And, if you then project sort of 8 years or so, 9 years or so forward from the church plant coming to an end, I'm as involved in church life and leadership as I ever have been. It did, as I said, it took a couple of years to sort of recover capacity, and we get older, don't we? And that kind of wears us out a bit as well. But I'm back going to elders meetings, working with the guys, preaching, all of that kind of stuff. So it's all good.
Fantastic.
I wouldn't use the word calling. I'd say if you're someone who God grips in a way that in your heart of hearts you're made for nothing else than leading a church or being full-time or being on the staff, then that's what you should do. And if you're so kind of passionate about the marketplace, then of course you should be involved in church life fully, and you should be involved in leading stuff, and it's all good. Really
good advice. So I guess advice to maybe someone who's considering the approach that you maybe used, where you took an approach of being involved in the workplace and senior church leadership. What would you tell them, maybe in terms of building teams, other things that you maybe?
Oh God,
look back on and you think, maybe I could have done that, or maybe I couldn't have, or I don't know. Just look back 10 years and just think of things that you would maybe have ingrained in that stage that maybe would have helped or not.
There's so much in that question. You probably need to ask the same question again in a minute because I'll have forgotten. I think when we were in the church plant, we believe in team, don't we? For a whole host of reasons, which you don't want to interview me about now, but we complement each other and we look out for each other, and it's just vital. And we had a good team, and it would have been great to see someone rise up and be able to take responsibility. But realistically, we were in a part of the world where, when kids go to university, they stay away and don't come back until they've got teenage children. So we see lots of people moving back to the area whose kids have left home or whose kids are older, but we don't get many people in their 20s, early 30s. So I'm not sure that we didn't try all of the right things at the time. What I would say now, this sounds like I'm criticising other people, it's not at all like that, but I would say at the time before we planted, we should probably have had a clearer view and discussion about what God was calling those of us in leadership to. So it was more on the table rather than uncovered in the journey. More openness and honesty pre-day one is probably the biggest thing. In terms of kind of juggling everything, you have to be honest, don't you? We are all gifted with different sized engines. Some people have got a 5-litre supercar, and some people are driving a 1-litre runaround, and that's fine. That's reality, and we have to accept that we all have different capacities. I think, relatively speaking, in comparison to others, I've probably got quite a big capacity, so I could juggle. While it was all going well, I could juggle family life and church leadership and a big job in the world. But as soon as one of those areas starts to come under pressure, probably you can just about hang on. But when 2 of those areas are under pressure, you can't cope with it. And that's one of the reasons why we need team, isn't it? To look out for each other and to cover those shortfalls. So, we only live this life once, and my encouragement to people would be to go for it in terms of, whether the primary calling is the marketplace or the workplace, and to get involved as fully as you can, but just kind of listen to your friends around you, that you don't overdo it. I think that's what I'd say.
That's really good wisdom. So I guess you just mentioned there a little bit more of a strategic view to future leadership development and how that's going to work out later on in the life of a plant. Just bearing in mind that people's callings also to the marketplace and just being sensitive to that and working in teams. That's great advice. I'd just love to poke around a little bit.
I'm gonna before you poke around, you just reminded me of something. I think there are people who are able to move and church plant and use their business and marketplace skills, knowing in their head that the end game, if the church does well, is that they can migrate into working for the church and giving it capacity. Brilliant. That's great and really to encourage. But that's a sort of third way, isn't it? There are people who know they're called to the church. There are people that know they're called to the marketplace, and there are people that believe that they're on a God-driven journey to transfer from one to the other, which are all good. Sorry, poke around.
A bit like Paul, because he was a tent maker, but by the end of it, he was clearly full-time. Well, he was in prison, so he was full-time for the church, really, writing letters that we really receive from today. So that's really good advice. So I was just going to talk about apostolic input, and I guess how people helped you on your journey back through those 3 years to, I guess, a position of health in the local church and in work. So just talk about the dynamics, both apostolic as well as friends, how that helped you back.
Well, I think you don't plant a church in any way other than on a firm apostolic and prophetic basis.
Good.
So you need that on day one. And, Mike Betts, who leads Relational Mission, and at the time, Maurice Nightingale, who now kind of looks after Relational Mission in Europe, but at the time was working in East Anglia, were very supportive in those early days of church planting, and that was all good. I can remember when things started to get very difficult for me at work, Mike Betts was very kind of wise and supportive and gave me, I think about the sort of second day I was off, I was having breakfast with him, and he said to me, and I don't know if he knows that it was prophetic, but it was. He said, you will get to the point where you won't not want to have gone through this awful thing that you're going through, because you will be in a far better place when you come out the other end. And at the time, I kind of hung on to that bit of wisdom, and gosh, it amazingly came true. I mean, I'm so glad I'm not in the corporate world. I'm so blessed with what I'm doing now in terms of relationships with people, opportunity to witness to people. Let's be honest, materially, I'm so blessed. So yeah, it's been fantastic. When I came back to the church, it was very difficult for both of us to sort of, what was all that about? I would say that the elders at LCC were superb. I mean, I can remember our first morning back. Vince, one of the guys, was leading the service, and it just got the whole church to stand and clap us for our faithfulness. Ben Parish, who was leading the church, just on a friend-to-friend basis, just how often we met for a cup of coffee or breakfast, and just that loving kindness, really, in those first few years where, we were recovering from the weights being lifted off our shoulders without really realising at the time that was the case. So friendship, basically.
That's fantastic, and it's amazing how God has restored the balance in your life. It's been 10 years, I guess, since that time, and now you've got that balance back. And just maybe tell us a little about how it looks like. How does your time get spent now, and your passions? How do you feel those are being outworked and used, and you sensing God's calling you, I guess, in this fresh season? And maybe just tell us a little about the current situation that you're in.
Yeah, well, work is a bit bizarre in this awful pandemic season that we're suffering, and so many businesses and business leaders have been really under the cosh. I'm working in a niche which is going swimmingly. I think the year that's for me just ended financially was probably the second best that we've had. So business is busy. I do notice that I'm getting to the stage where I'm able to invest in things that don't take as long but provide more reward. So I'm becoming smarter, as I think we often get when we're in our when we can reap the dividends of much experience. That's a nice way of saying old. So that's all good. I mean, the kids are at a different stage, aren't they? I've got one leaving university in June, one with a year to go. Ben's just doing his GCSEs, which is odd because there's no exams. So it's a different stage in family life as well, which is less time pressured, I think. Church-wise, I mean, it's great. Along with another guy, we attend the elders meetings, but aren't elders. That's kind of being explored with us, and it's just like meeting with a group of friends, and that's great. And you see your leadership gifting in that context being utilised, and people valuing what you have to say. So that's good. I co-lead the church's prayer culture group, which is just really trying to do all the stuff that you're doing. On a Scottish basis in the church, just change the culture and cause people to access praying to the Father more readily, I guess. I preach occasionally. and lead services, and yeah, I'm just there really if people want to use my gifts in the time constraints that we've got. So yeah.
It's a wonderful story that you've explained there. And it's wonderful how God has restored you, I guess, restored your story and allowed you the peace and the grace to be able to talk about it. Because often people are too broken to sort of revisit, but it looks like God has just gradually moved you back into a place of, wide open spaces, so to speak, and giving you that workplace commission, but as well as that restored the church commission, which is, equally, because you're pumping on both sides now with a much better view on both, much more clarity in terms of your role and your passion and your excitement. Which is
really one of the things we've not talked about, which feeds exactly into what you've just said, is the sort of way that God has spoken prophetically through dear friends and people I never knew over the years. I can remember probably about 5 or 6 years ago, in the space of a fortnight, 2 people, one from the front on a Sunday morning picking on me, and one in a completely different setting in a small group of people praying for each other, prophesy exactly the same thing about how my success in business was going to take off. And within weeks, they didn't know each other. They didn't know what each other had said. It was exactly the same. And within weeks, it had rocketed off. So I think I would summarize what you're saying as being, God rescued me. But he also rescued me through dear friends who didn't do anything particular other than give me space. But it's so good when God speaks into your situation directly.
Oh, wonderful. Any parting comments before we close up here? Just any last encouragements, anything you want to just that's come to mind, maybe God will just give you.
It's really good to see you. And my prayer would be that God continues to bless you in all that you're doing. But no, I mean, I think we've kind of probably touched all the bases to death, really.
Awesome. Let me stop the recording. Thanks a lot, Martin. It's been awesome talking to you.
Is that okay?